And welcome to our parenting adolescence community. I'm really happy that you're joining me for our first free webinar just to explain to you what's coming up in the series going forward. And the very fact that you've joined me in this webinar shows that your dedication to making the adolescent years as productive and harmonious as you possibly can for your family is paramount for you. So this free webinar is just the beginning of your journey and hopefully our journey together. So for those of you that don't know me, I think I should begin by just briefly introducing myself, not just professionally, but personally, because when it comes to delivering any kind of webinar on parenting adolescents, usually people want to know that you come bearing a little bit of experience too. So my name's Amanda Graham, and I am a family and adolescent psychotherapist. I have over 30 years of experience supporting families through the complexities of adolescence, amongst other things as well. I hold a master's degree in mental health psychology and a postgraduate diploma in cognitive behavioral therapy. So my feet are firmly planted in science, although I do bring in quite a lot of more modern trainings, which are also relevant. And I have recently trained with people like Dr. Gabor Mate. I have researched and used a lot of attachment theory from Dr. Gordon Neufeld and also Dr. Dan Siegel, who some of you may have heard of, but he is really the leading light in how we adapt to the adolescent's brain and its development. So these are all really important aspects. From a personal perspective, I've lived and I've worked in many cultures, many different cultures around the world. And I think this also brings diversity to what I deliver. Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Europe, as well as my home country, the UK, which is where I did most of my training, have all allowed me to add family dynamic positives and negatives to what I deliver to families today, either on a one-to-one basis or actually in delivering these webinars to lots of people together. So it's really important for me to understand different cultures and how they interact dynamically. More importantly than any qualifications, I always say to people now when I'm starting working with them is that I am a parent. I have a son, I have a daughter. I've dealt with both very different dynamics during the adolescent years. They're only 2 years apart. During their adolescent years, my husband was working away. I was working full time. I know what it's like to face the demands of parenting for our adolescents. As a grandparent, a recent grandparent, I'm also looking at parenting through a slightly different lens now. And I will say at this point that the joys of being so around my grandchildren at the moment is that I have developed a slight cold and cough. So if you do see me disappear quickly, it's because I'm not going to subject you to a coughing fit on camera. I will mute myself and take a drink. So please just bear with me on that one. Handling parenting at the time that you're in it is very different to when you're able to observe as a family member on the periphery. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that when I see my daughter doing a brilliant job of parenting as she is at the moment, I'm standing there wondering to myself, did I ever get it right? Did I handle this correctly? It feels like I did it so differently and I was so naive. And that's okay, right? That's okay to do that, to question your parenting style from one child to the next. We aren't the same parent from each child to each child, from one day to the next. Things differ for us. So keep in mind that everything is okay. Whatever it is you're going through, whatever dynamic you're dealing with, we're going to deal with it here. I also remember the intensity of my own adolescence in my own family life as an adoptee. I know the pride, I know the fear, the confusion and the deep love that my parents felt for me, I also remember the moments of insecurity as an adolescent with additions to deal with. Adolescence becomes a time naturally of questioning. It becomes a time where peer influence becomes really important to adolescents over parental guidance at times. And there's a constant push of all of the boundaries that are put in place, usually for their safety, although they don't appreciate it at the time necessarily. So when I reflect on it now, I'm at peace with who I am. I've done the work on myself. I'm in strong relationships with my family. I realize the way to being a better parent is to question our own style, not to judge it, but just to say, was I getting it right? Could I do it differently? Could I handle it better? And seeing how it develops and not being afraid to do things differently, which for me is really like a deep sigh for parents. You can do it differently and you mustn't judge yourself. So, mindful coherence, I'm going to start sharing my screen actually for you. So, just bear with me 1 second while I do so. I have a few slides so you don't get bored with looking at my face. I'll put it onto full screen. Here we go. So, just beginning off by telling you a little bit about mindful coherence, which was created in 2023. And it was created by myself as my own model of therapy, bringing together everything that I'd learned over the past 30 years, all of the trainings that I'd done that I thought could be tweaked in some way for the problems and the challenges that our parents are going through, particularly today in today's world, bringing the best of some of them and weaving them into my own psychological and cognitive behavioral therapy background, which is really important. So there are 3 steps that I work through with parents and anyone when they come to me for therapy. And that would be to uncover, to discover, and to recover. And if you just think about those 3 words, they are so able to be interpreted in lots of different ways. It leaves lots of room for bringing in many options for finding out what works for you as a parent, may not work for another one as a parent. So it's really important that we just allow that little bit of exploration, that curiosity in the safe space. By 2025, we had a massive rise in anxiety. ADHD diagnosis was on the rise yet again. I thought that we perhaps had seen the worst of it in the 1990s when I was just heading out in my career, but actually, for different reasons, we have a rise of ADHD again. The lengthy waiting times, particularly in the UK, for support and counselling, and the fact that that led to parents feeling particularly isolated, very unsure and alone, and very unsupported is one of the reasons why we're focusing on this parenting adolescent series now. In the UK, the waiting lists are long. If you do have a diagnosis, then the chances are you may not get to see somebody like myself, a psychologist, for upwards of a year, unless you're able to pay privately. So it's really important to remember this. Parenting is as old as time. It's passed on through generations. You can do this, but you can do it if you feel supported, if you're in a community where you feel that you can share and you aren't going to be judged, and you can brainstorm with other parents. That's the really important thing. And depending on the places that I've lived, I've seen different communities bringing up children in different ways. And it's for sure that those children, those adolescents that are supported by generational families, so families in close proximity, definitely benefit more to feeling more secure when they go through their adolescence. I believe something very strongly that when we invest in understanding adolescence, we don't just change the behavior. And when I say the behavior, I mean our behavior and adolescent behavior. We strengthen the relationship for life. And to go back to what I said to you earlier about my own children, one of the joys now is that I am a great part, thankfully, to them in their lives, in their parenting, and I don't feel as if I am getting in the way at all. I feel as if there is perhaps some added value to having older people, older generations contributing and supporting not only the parents, but also just putting a different perspective on the grandparent role as well, which is really lovely with the child. So today is not about telling you what to do. I'm not going to do that. It's about giving you some top tips from the series. I'm going to share with you a few of those. It's also about giving you clarity. It's about giving you a reassurance so that you as a parent can begin to feel confidence is growing within you in your own set of skills rather than fear. So let me just give you the first top tip. You're going to hear the word resilience a lot through the Parenting Adolescent series. I write about resilience a whole bunch at the moment. And that's because I think it's equally important for parents to keep it in mind. And of course, for adolescents to develop, not only through their childhood, but also well into adolescence to prepare them for adult life. Unfortunately, I have seen it becoming less important as I talk to families over, say, the last 10 years. It is something that I see that is probably lacking. And it's something that I'm very, very keen for parents to show their children and their adolescents how to do. So that's something that's a core theme that runs through my series. And I love this quote, which I'm going to share with you. So if you want to write it down, it's a really good top tip. Resilience is the luxury that no one sees until it becomes a legacy. So resilience is the luxury that no one sees until it becomes a legacy. So I'm just going to explain that the chat feature now that you have is there for you to ask any questions that you want to do during this webinar. So as anything comes up for you, or I may once or twice give you a self-reflective question. And if you feel like answering it, if something comes to mind straight away, then by all means stick it in the chat. So that's there for you to do. And at the end, we will, depending on what time we have left, at the end, I will go through some of the questions and hopefully answer them for you. But don't despair, because if there are a lot of questions and I don't get to answer them all, then we will copy them and I will answer them and email them to you. So it's really important that we have your email address so that we can answer your questions from the chat. If you have a particularly personal question that you don't want to share within the group, I totally understand that. There is always the option to have a private session with me. You can go to the website and there is a link to one-on-one sessions with me. So I'm hopeful that we've covered all options here. So moving on now, if parenting your adolescent feels more intense than you expected, it doesn't mean you're failing as a parent. It means that you're in one of the most neurologically complex developmental stages your child is ever going to experience. It doesn't mean it's easier for you, but I always think that if we can put it into perspective how the brain develops and just keep reminding ourselves as parents that perhaps they're exhibiting very adult traits and yet they're not quite there. I think it's always worth us trying to remember that. Today's webinar is not about perfect parenting. It's not about judgment. It's about informed, grounded, relationship-led parenting. So if anyone would like to, here's a first pause for reflection. In the chat, if you feel like it, please type one word that describes your current parenting season. One word that sums up what you're going through as a parent right now. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. And I don't expect you to be looking hard for a word that describes perfectly what you're experiencing, but how are you feeling as a parent right now in this? So we're going to come back to those a little later, but if you feel like sharing it in the chat, please go ahead and do that. We'd be delighted to see, because there's no right or wrong answer here, by the way. Why do you parents need support right now? So it's challenging in any culture, but today it's more complex in cultures in the UK, in the US, places that are more developed are struggling more to deal with our adolescents. Why is this? So we have constant digital comparison between our adolescents. There is always a growing demand, it seems. Every year it gets harder for our adolescents in terms of academic pressure. And as we know, the whole debate about whether academia is suitable for all children, we know it isn't. So it is more challenging for some adolescents rather than others. Hence, we have to deal with them all differently. There is constant digital comparison via social media. Identity development is happening in public spaces. And so adolescents are feeling that they can't be and share exactly what they feel, who they are. They have to be something to fit in. And that's proving to be really challenging for parents to deal with. And then simply neurological overstimulation. I have always said to parents, allow your children to be bored. They need to be bored. When they're bored, then they look for things to do. They start to use their imagination. You just have to watch a toddler who is going about their business, age 2, age 3, and you see their wild imagination. I watch my granddaughter all the time, and because her vocabulary is limited and her memory is obviously limited, she will jump in and out of whatever memory she has to hand, usually very recent. And adolescents are experiencing the same, but in a different way. They're overloaded with things. Quite often, parents are wanting them to experience, wanting their adolescents to have as much experience of different things as they can. And that's okay as long as they have time to be bored in between, because it's in those moments of boredom that the real growth happens. So, talking about the adolescent nervous system and how it might cope, they are rarely truly offline. So, what does that mean for an adolescent's nervous system? Even our schools had taken to educating online, although I do see, and we talk about this in our webinars in the parenting series, how the schools now are reversing their teaching online. And what a welcome relief that is, because our children need to explore for themselves. They need to research for themselves. They need to learn to be able to how to look up and research subjects rather than having it at their fingertips. And so how do their nervous systems, when they're overloaded, how do they cope? Well, their nervous systems become very reactive. So my top tip number 2 for this webinar might be, when we ask as a parent, what's wrong with you? You know, they're coming to you, their emotions high, they're not making sense, you can't work out what's wrong with them. And we just throw out that question, what's wrong with you? How about we try to bring it back to thinking about experiencing and trying to get online with what they're experiencing in terms of their emotions. So what is overwhelming you? What is it that you can't deal with right now? How are you feeling? Might be a better way of approaching the child or the adolescent when they are in that position. When that shift changes in how you ask questions, then your tone in dealing with your adolescent also shifts instantly. So the four stages, which you will be familiar of, I'm sure, as an adult, but I'm going to remind you of them. They're going on in your adolescent's nervous system too. When a child is fighting against you, when a teenager is fighting against you, they are arguing with you and they are fighting mode. When they are when they're in flight mode, they tend to withdraw. So if you have a teenager who constantly withdraws to the bedroom, they're in flight mode. There's freeze mode, where they shut down completely. They may do it in your presence. They may do it at a family dinner table. They may do it in the family group when you're out on a family holiday or a trip, but they shut down completely and won't talk to you. That's when they're in freeze mode. And then the fawn mode, where they go into people pleasing. My experience of this happening with adolescents is usually because they have experienced something that's made them feel quite insecure. They may not think the parents know, the parents may or may not know. And they go into people pleasing mode because they are almost in a relief state, but also they are thinking that, okay, well, maybe I got away with this. So I just kind of need to keep, them happy and we'll make it better next time. They're working it all out in their own brain by themselves. So just asking you now, when your teen is escalated, what state do you think they are in? Can you work that out? And maybe in the future, a takeout from this webinar would be to try and work out whether they are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And then what's really interesting on the back of that, how does the parent react to it? What state do I think I am in as a parent? So they're two really interesting questions. When you're in it and it's a difficult situation with your adolescent, when it's escalated, what state do you think they're in? And then bring it back to yourself. What state do I think I'm in as a parent? And this is what enables the situation to then be handled quite differently. It builds psychological credibility for you and some kind of connection with your adolescent, which is healthy. So we're just changing perhaps the way that we talk to our adolescents. The age range for adolescents has shifted across generations, without a doubt. And we go into this in more detail in PA1 of our Parenting Adolescence series. Here's the neurological reality, though. The emotional brain develops faster than the reasoning brain. Now, whoever came up with that clever idea is still to be named, but that's the way it is. Science says that their emotional brain develops faster than the reasoning brain. And you can see that in all children, how they express themselves emotionally. So therefore, they feel before they think. Every brain develops at a different time, and our parent style will heavily influence how and when our adolescent's brain develops into that reasoning stage. So we talk about this a lot in our Parenting Adolescence series, and the link will be in the chat for you all through this session. When you think about situations like door slamming, when they throw it at you that you don't understand, you're in that escalation, you're trying to reason with them and they throw at you, you don't understand. They make impulsive decisions. I remember once my son saying he was going to run away. He ran away about 50 meters along the lane to a stable yard, where the farmer then rang me and said, did you know Josh is in the stables? And I said, I didn't, but I'll come along. By which time everything had diffused slightly. And but they make these impulsive decisions, and I guess what I'm saying is they don't quite know where to go with it. They don't want to come back to you and say, I made the wrong decision. They're unable to reason that through. But at the end of the day, it's about being aware of them doing that and allowing for it as a parent. And also, the emotional intensity is just increased because of hormones. So they rage at times through both boys and girls. And so we need to take that into consideration. And once you understand this, you realize that actually, in my generation, quite often we were deemed to be adults. And in fact, a lot of cultures still see teenagers as full-on adults at 18, some younger. And yet now we realize that in many brains of adolescents, and particularly boys, they don't develop their reasoning brain until a lot later. And it can be a lot later. So we go into this in a little bit more detail, the reasons why. But it's really important for us just to accept that. And it also gives a little bit of a sigh of relief again. It's yet another one of those aha moments where parents can go, okay, so they don't have to be an adult at 18. Wow, okay, that's going to give us just a little bit more time to work with them on this, right? So your adolescent's priorities are simple. Number one, they want to belong. Number two, their identity is really important. So, what they put off to their peers, probably dominantly, and then to everyone else around them at school, the family, that's really important too. That's number two. Number three, they are craving autonomy. They think they can deal with as much autonomy as we will give them. We know they can't. We don't want to say to them they can't. So, how do we share that autonomy with them so that they feel as if they're slowly receiving control of it while we are still supervising it? And then the other thing that we have to bear in mind is that our adolescents are always seeking novelty. They are wired to explore and they don't think about the consequences. They are not consciously reckless, adolescents, even though they may seem so at times. They are neurologically primed for expansion and they want to explore the world in the same way that a toddler can discover and also love the new experience of emptying a pan cupboard over and over and over again. The adolescent sees someone doing something that they haven't tried and they don't think of the consequences immediately. They just want to get in and enjoy it. They want to explore it. They want the thrill, which is much more important. The question for us parents is, how do we enable this kind of exploration, but doing it with boundaries and clear boundaries that our adolescents respect? Our Supporting Independence and Decision Making book and webinar, which is PA4 in the series, will help you to understand that. If this is a thing that you're struggling with right now, then I encourage you to join us for that. So my top tip for number 3 of this webinar, our role as a parent is not to eliminate risk. So we don't want to be that helicopter parent, as they've termed it in the last 10 years. We don't want to be that parent that anticipates what they're going to try and do and to stop it. We want to allow them to take some kind of risk because risk builds resilience. Our job as a parent is to scaffold that risk, to scaffold it. So to give them the support mechanism so that they can go ahead and explore, knowing that we will be there to help them through it. One of the big subjects that we talk about through the series is also attachment and safety. Relationship comes first and foremost between parent and adolescent. Before any strategy can work, there must be a feeling of safety. That relationship creates a safe space for them to explore, to make mistakes, and to review it with you as their parent or caregiver. Secure attachment will allow our adolescents to develop resilience. And this is so important. It can only be done by them being able to admit to you that they're making mistakes, to be able to get and receive guidance and discuss it with you, and also to stay emotionally connected, being aware of all of the emotions that come up for you and your adolescent during this experience. Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who I talk a lot about, is the leading expert over the last 30 to 40 years on attachment theory. And I'm going to ask you a powerful question now. You can share it with us, or you can just muse over it and let us know how you feel later down the line. But this is the question. Does my teen, at the moment, my adolescent, feel safe bringing me their worst moment? So if you are parenting an adolescent right now, the chances are that you will have experienced something, I'm sure, where it's been really challenging for you both to deal with, or they've got themselves into a slightly risky scenario that they felt they couldn't deal with. Would your adolescent then feel safe talking to you about that? It's really important that you reflect on that. And while you reflect on that, I will just briefly explain the attachment styles that they talk about. John Bowlby is the leading psychologist, psychotherapist who developed the attachment theory. And while some of you will know these because they are human psychology across the board, it is worth reminding you of them in terms of your adolescent. So the reason for that is that your attachment style will actually influence throughout your life, your friendships, your romantic relationships, your independence, how you deal with it, and also how you regulate your own emotions. So if we can start to identify the kind of attachment that we know what we want in terms of attachment, but maybe we analyze what that attachment looks like with our adolescent right now, then is it a secure attachment, number one, where adolescents do feel comfortable with closeness to you and their own autonomy? And to do this, they tend to have very healthy peer and romantic relationships, and also a relatively healthy relationship with their parent or carer. That's when they're in secure attachment mode. If your adolescent appears to be quite preoccupied, they can often be, unknowingly to some parents, in anxious attachment mode, where teens fear rejection. They seek high reassurance a lot of the time, and they experience a lot of emotional highs and lows in any of their relationships. There is a preoccupation and an insecurity in this anxious attachment. If your adolescent is showing signs of avoidant, dismissive attachment, then they are going to be valuing their independence strongly. They're going to be avoiding emotional intimacy with you as a parent or carer, or anyone for that matter. And also, they are not going to like it to feel vulnerable. They're going to be avoiding vulnerability at all cost. So there's a bravado about the avoidant, attached adolescent. And then finally, the fourth one is your disorganized attachment, which is characterized by inconsistent or contradictory behaviors in all of their relationships. One time they're exhibiting this, next time they're exhibiting this. They don't quite know who to be. It's often linked to early trauma or unstable caregiving for whatever reasons. And again, there is no judgment when we're looking at actually trying to work out which attachment style our adolescent may be in right now. And of course, like with everything, it can be changed. So with a little bit of work, we can actually work on improving that attachment. But in adolescence, attachment patterns can shift as teens develop greater independence and form deeper peer and romantic bonds. So, fostering healthy relationships is our fifth webinar and ebook in the parenting series. And this expands on how to identify and gives more advice and more tools on how a parent can cope with each different style. So you can tap into that if this is where you are at the moment. So my top tip is designed for you to create and strengthen a stronger attachment to your adolescent. This is top tip number 4 of this webinar. And it's a micro tool that you might want to use 3 times a week, 10 minutes each time. It requires the parent and the adolescent to be completely present in an environment where there are no distractions. So no phone. You're not going to correct anything they say. They may correct you, but you're not going to correct them. Remember, you're the parent. There's just presence here. And this may happen in a neutral zone. So it may happen outside of the house. I've suggested in the past to people that they fix a time because for a lot of people, they will forget to do it. But it is much better if you can seize a moment when you know it's the right time. And again, it's about awareness from the parental perspective. So, for instance, you're walking somewhere, you're going from A to B with that adolescent. Both of you seem quite calm. Is this the time that you might tap into this 10-minute anchoring where there are no phones, no corrections, just presence and a conversation? This alone strengthens an attachment to your adolescent dramatically. So that is a tried and tested top tip of a lot of my parents over the last 30 years. So this is a really nice quote, which I just want to just bring in here. And it just kind of sums up Krishnamurti. You can look them up. They have been, they're very intuitive in relationships and human psychology. Action has meaning only in relationship. So if the relationship doesn't exist, anything that goes on within that relationship is almost irrelevant. Action on any level will only bring conflict without the relationship. The understanding of relationship is infinitely more important than the search for any plan of action. So that's why this 10-minute anchoring 3 times a week is definitely worth investing in your adolescent. Peers, mentors, and the missing village. So I talk a lot about the village, and the village I'm referring to would be in terms of family, aunts, uncles, cousins, people that in my generation we lived much more closely to our grandparents and our relatives. And also, we would spend a lot more time as young children, so I'm talking primary age particularly, we would spend a lot more time outside. Of course, social media didn't exist, gaming didn't exist, we didn't have the distraction of screens. And so we would feel that everyone around us, when we were playing outside for hours on end, they could be there for us. If anything happened to any one of us or my peer group, we could go to anyone's home and it would be handled and we would feel safe and secure there. That's one of the big things that has changed about our societal living right now. And for whatever reasons, families are living much further apart, and children aren't mixing so much in their own communities and playing outside together. Things are happening more in the home. So the question is, while peers are important, while the family is super important, how do we create a mentorship around for children who are not living amongst their family? And so we talk about this a lot because without that village, without that um, support of the elders around us, peer influence, which plays a central role in adolescence, can dangerously become more dominant. And it's really important to go back to the attachment theory that they have this connection and attachment to healthy adults or mentors so that they put the peer group as an important part of development, but not the most important part of their development. Healthy peer relationships encourage good growth, they encourage resilience, they learn different things from different people, different characters. Skewed peer ties can cause imbalance. And I get a lot of parents that talk to me about the friendship groups of their adolescents and how they wish they weren't involved in certain groups. And I'm afraid we need to bring it back to how we are attaching to our adolescents. What is it that they're looking for from that particular peer group that we're not able to give them and talk about with them? So we talk about that a lot in the series again. So it's really important that we are able to look at the bigger picture and ask ourselves, what are we doing to try to make that a healthier scenario? Parents should stay steady and avoid competition. Whoosh, this is a big one. I saw this a lot when I reflect back to when my children were small and the competition that can go on in parenting groups, outside school gates, birthday parties. One child has one thing, therefore other children must have it. It's about creating perhaps a community where parents feel empowered to work together to make sure that they're all working on that peer group together so that they don't feel the pressure. Avoid competition at all costs. So, when it feels volatile, volatility and unpredictability is a part of a healthy family system. We are not looking to eliminate it. It is always going to rear its face. We just need to know as parents how we're going to deal with it. All of these opportunities that arise for us that we feel insecure about as a parent is an opportunity to model maturity to our children, to model how we exhibit our feelings, and most importantly, to show some vulnerability. It is okay to get it wrong. And can we discuss it? Can we find another way of perhaps approaching a situation? I understand from a lot of people that I work with that reflecting on their own adolescence and childhood can bring about a lot of shame. And while it's not something that we like to dwell on, it is something that can, if we do confront it as parents, then we can deal with it and weaken it. And that's really, really important. It's an important part of learning about being a parent. Be gentle with yourself. Don't judge yourself. Just accept that this is a fact. This is what happened to me. But do you know what? I'm a little bit uneasy about bringing this to my parenting skill. We don't have to do that. So change it now. It's never ever too late to rebuild a connection. I work a lot actually with a lot of adult parents and adult children and trying to rebuild a healthy connection from something that could have been quite awful for them as an experience for both when that adult child was a small child or an adolescent. and it still can be rebuilt. It still can heal. So supporting independence and decision making is PA4 in our series, and it's one that's really, really good to approach in terms of how, as parents, we allow in this very volatile world of ours and quite often dangerous world as it appears, how do we give our children, our adolescents, this independence and enable them to start making healthy decisions? There are two options that I discovered in parents as I have worked with families. One is you can set control-based boundaries because I said so. In other words, we're not giving them a reason why we might be making a decision as to why they cannot do something. And then there's a connection-based boundary. So we might say it in a different way. I love you too much not to keep you safe. So you have a control-based boundary, which just says, because I say so, you do it. Or a connection-based boundary, I love you, and it is my job to keep you safe. That's why I am sharing this with you. Again, it's just how we're saying it to them. We're sharing with them the emotion first and an explanation with the logic second. To collaborate on rules and boundaries is this connection-based boundary making, to sit down and work through and compromise on what the adolescent wants and what the parent wants. So top tip number 5 for this webinar would be to teach this framework, we need to have healthy boundaries. And to create healthy boundaries in a connection-led boundary setting, we need to have 4 things as a parent to include in this. One is warmth. The second is clarity. The third is to be consistent. So whether you are parenting alone or you are co-parenting, there has to be consistency across everything that you do and in terms of your boundary setting. And because not all connection-led boundary setting always goes to plan, because they don't, then we need to have a contingency for how we might repair. So how we might sit down with our adolescent. We might say, okay, this didn't work because you exceeded what I'd said. You'd come in at 11 o'clock instead of 10:30. And we need to repair that. We need to review it. So can we have a discussion around it? Confirm your support when things don't go to plan. Don't go in and immediately issue a punishment. Often that will backfire on you. What we want to be able to do is learn for the next time. So praise good decisions, unpack what went wrong, all with a little bit of compassion. This is what builds your autonomy for your adolescent gradually. When your teen is arguing with you that the time is too early for them to be home at 10 o'clock at night, and they come to you and the classic response is, everyone else can stay out later, why do I have to come home at 10 o'clock? Then maybe the parent might consider an answer like this. I understand wanting that freedom. I can remember going through a similar situation with my parents. But right now, 10 p.m. is your boundary. We've agreed this. And if the next month goes well, then we'll revisit it again. So that will build the autonomy gradually for your adolescents. A key phrase to give to you now, and you can write this down because it's a really useful one to remember. I'm responsible for safety, me as the parent. You're responsible for honesty. And you can repeat that to your adolescent. They will understand that. I'm responsible for your safety and you're responsible for your honesty. And it always lands well with them. Creating a safe space for dialogue, we've spoken about, encouraging critical thinking when you ask questions, but you don't lecture them. You gradually increase their responsibility and you let them try solutions, even if it's hard to compromise with them, and you allow them a little bit more freedom than you thought you wanted to, as long as you have a contingency plan so that you have a pickup, a backstop to it, then let them make a mistake. Always let your adolescents, if they really feel they need to push the boundary and it's not pushing them into a dangerous risk, then I would say let them take that little risk because there will be a learning that will come from it. So communication skills are absolutely key. And Terry Real quoted, "There is no redeeming value in harshness." So that's really interesting. So for all of us that had that good cop, bad cop parent, one of them would always come in with a very deep voice and be very stern. And as a small child, you'd be in fear of that person. We know there's no redeeming value in harshness. Children don't learn particularly from that. If anything, they are going to withdraw from it as they get older. There is nothing that harshness does that loving firmness doesn't do better. So be firm with love. And that's a really interesting thing to remember, okay? So it's very easy for us just to jump into harshness, reactivity straight away. We need to take a deep breath as a parent and we need to regulate ourselves, which is part of the four-part conversation model that we also go into in our communication skills as part of the PA2 Parenting Adolescent series. Stage 1 is to regulate yourself as a parent. Stage 2 is to state your observation neutrally, what you see factually. Stage 3 is to share the impact of how it is impacting you and the adolescent. And then stage 4 is to hopefully invite collaboration on how we might handle things better or do things differently. And this is a really important part. The four parts being the what happened conversation, where we go into, let's talk about what happened last night. And you're chatting to your adolescent, and each of you have a story in your mind as to what happened. They're going to be different. That's when conflict is going to arise. He says, she says. And the key skill from this part of what happened conversation is to move from blaming each other to having curiosity about what happened. Once you've established that, this curiosity, then you can start to ask, well, what's the feeling part of this conversation? The second stage, what emotions are we both experiencing? For the parent, it may have been total fear that you didn't pick up your phone. It was 10 o'clock at night. You were due to be in, and all of a sudden you've got no contact with them. For the adolescent, they are concerned. They are angry that they have to be home early. They're pushing that boundary, or I'll just stay another 30 minutes. Whatever it is they're experiencing, it can be talked about. Ignoring these feelings, this feelings part of the conversation, is only going to make your conflict worse. So it's about being able to identify those. And when we do that, the key skill that we develop is to acknowledge and validate our emotions without escalating them. The third part is the identity conversation. So difficult conversations threaten anyone's identity. Am I a good parent? You could be asking yourself, and the teen could be saying, well, did I get that right? Am I a responsible teen? People become very defensive when their identity feels attacked. And what we want to do is separate whatever behavior we've seen between adolescent and parent. We want to separate that behavior from the identity. So that's a key skill in the identity conversation that you have. Finally, when you get to it, if you get to it, and you may not get to it in the first conversation that you use this model in, We need to move away from winning to understanding. So it's the learning part of the conversation. We focus on the contribution. How did each of us, parent and adolescent, contribute to the conversation rather than apportion blame to each other? And then hopefully we end with a collaborative problem-solving situation. Tip number 6 here. Teach in you to pause and ask 4 questions is really vital in this process of communication. If a parent can reflect on what story am I telling myself about my adolescent, and what might my teen's story be about this situation? What feelings are underneath? If you can prepare yourself like this before you go into the 4-part conversation, then you're already ahead of the game. What do I, as a parent, want to learn or solve with my adolescent together? And again, we explore this much more in our Parenting Adolescent series. Validation, I will say at this point, is not agreement. It is acknowledgement. And the micro skill here is to reflect as a parent, to validate what has happened, what's experienced, and to ask, to be curious about going forward. Why does this model work with adolescents? It respects their emerging autonomy, it reduces their power struggles, it builds emotional literacy, and it strengthens their attachment security. It models conflict resolution skills that teens can use themselves later on in life. So you're demonstrating a lot of what is, I think, to be resilience building traits in your teen, all of which will help them to cope with autonomy. When you've tried everything, pause, regulate yourself first, prioritize repair over being right. You don't need to solve it immediately, but what you do need to do is make that attachment very clear, work on the relationship with your adolescent so you can communicate. Name what you see without blame, keep your doors open, small check-ins when something has happened, asking them how they're feeling. Would they like to have a conversation about it now, perhaps a day later? Anything is open to keeping that attachment very strong. And return later when both your nervous systems are absolutely calm. So just pausing for reflection and explaining that this relationship is an ongoing work in progress. Whether this is helpful to you or not, I'm still working on the relationships that I have with my adult children. And so this is super important. And no respected action will come without that secure relationship. So that's the first and foremost that you need to focus on. And a confident teen will push boundaries all the way to independence. That's not going to stop happening. You're just going to be prepared for it. It's never, ever too late to work on the parent-child relationship. So my final top tip for today is to guide them. Think of a recent tense moment and ask yourself, was I responding from fear or was I responding from curiosity? If you're responding from fear, it would be along the lines of you're going to ruin your future. If it's in terms of something you're doing to they're not doing their homework or they're getting low grade assessment results. If you throw something out like that, you are coming at it from fear. If it's coming from curiosity, your question or your response might be, help me understand what's going on for you right now. How can I help you to make it better for you? Curiosity will build influence and resilience. So 3 memorable anchors just to round off this webinar for today. Connection before correction, calm before consequence, and curiosity before control. These are your anchors that I'd love you to take away from today. So on the next slide, we have the series for parenting adolescents, which I hope after this free webinar, you might be encouraged to join us. We have webinars and we have corresponding ebooks, and they're all available via the website. You can sign up today. They're going to be starting from the end of April and running one after the other. So I would love you, if you found this useful, to come on and join us in these future webinars. Or if your preference is to read, which some people's is as parents, and to use it at the time that you want, then by all means delve into the ebooks. So now I'd like to take a look at any questions that you might have put in the chat, and we have a couple of minutes. Okay, so the challenge is sometimes that they describe the situation, feelings as they see it, but it may not be the reality they're actually in. So it is not easy to advise them competently. So that's a really great observation. And I'd say that by even writing that as a parent, you are aware that that pause is really necessary. So I would say that the worst thing to do when we're in a situation like that is to try and fill that gap immediately and come to a very quick resolution. It's much, much easier. And this is an extra top tip, right? So I often say to parents, one of the top skills that I developed when my children were adolescents was to explain to them that I am not sure how to deal with this right now. I don't know how to react to what you're saying. So please give me and allow as much time as you think is necessary, dependent on the gravity of the situation that you're dealing with. Sometimes for me, if the child was mid-teens, it might have been overnight. And I'd say, let's discuss this tomorrow. And in the meantime, we're not going to discuss it anymore, but we're going to go about our day-to-day. That works really well. So don't be afraid to allow for that pause. And yes, personality, of course, comes into it. This is why it's really important that parents realize that quite often the things we go through, like understanding. So the series that I did was developed because all of these things come up generationally. It doesn't matter whether it was a generation I was dealing with 3 generations ago. Understanding adolescent development, you have to do that as a parent. You have to find effective communication strategies. You need to know how to support their independence and decision making. But yes, I totally agree. You need to also do it in line with whatever personality traits they inherently develop because of who they are and what they inherit from their parents. It's not all environment, but the majority of it is. So that's a really interesting observation. Any more questions? So I think that's it for our questions for today. So I just want to say that I want to thank you for being with me this afternoon. And I have really enjoyed sharing what we're going to be delivering over the coming months with you. And if you want to contact me personally, then by all means go to the website. Any contact form on there will get you to me, or you can email me. And if you come up with any questions beyond this, also, it's not too late. You can send me any questions. If you were part of this webinar, you can email them to me. So wishing you the best afternoon possible with your adolescent. Thank you.